Matt, straight up, I'm really looking forward to this fight between former Cage Warriors bantamweight champ Ilia Topuria, looking for a second win in as many fights with the UFC in 2020, taking on the United States of America's Damon the Leech Jackson. Now, Matt, Damon Jackson returning to the UFC after a long time away. His first run, he had a loss to Yancy Medeiros, a no contest, which was a loss, but it was overturned to Hani Jason, and then a draw against Levan Makashvili. He went away. I mean, this guy, former LFA legacy champion, spent some time with the PFL. He was on the worst highlight reel I think I've ever seen, you could be a part of, with Mavlik Khaybulaev and that knee in 10 seconds where he absolutely flatlined him. But he came back. He got a win with LFA, and then he ended up back in the UFC against Mirsad Bektic not that long ago. And for Ilia Topuria, I talked about it. I mean, the fact that he had a fight just about a month and a half ago against Youssef Zalal, people thought Craig Allan was crazy taking Ilia Topuria in that fight. But I have to say, and it's not a tire pump, it might sound like it, but Ilia Topuria really did impress. And Matt, in terms of the judging on that one, he won a unanimous decision, scored 29-28 by all three. Over on MMA decisions, there were 5 media members that scored at 29-28. There were 9 that scored at 30-27 for Topuria. There were 2 that scored at 30-26 for Ilia Topuria. Overall, he put on a really impressive performance against a streaking Youssef Zalal coming out of Factory X. And with Ilia Topuria, it was really tough to try and gauge what you were going to get, because on the regional scene, he hadn't fought the best level of competition. His fight against Brian Boulan with Cage Warriors was a really fun one. That kind of got me on the Ilia Topuria train. And when I find a prospect like that, Matt, I latch on to them. They're my guys, like Piotr Jan, like Askar Askarov. Maybe I'm just an ACB guy. Who knows? But with Damon Jackson coming back into the UFC, he was a huge underdog against Mirsad Bektic. He was a 295, actually, plus 295. That was back in September. He earned a third-round guillotine win over Bektic. What can you tell me about that fight?
Listen, Mirsad's going to Mirsad, and I mean that as a compliment, but also as a huge insult, because Mirsad Bektic, when you look at his skill set, he's a phenomenal wrestler. He's got pretty good jiu-jitsu. His striking's really good. You're probably like, wait, what's the downside? He's almost too good for his own sake, where he'll just keep on wrestling and keep on wrestling and keep on wrestling and just kind of overdo it to such a degree where he gets himself tired. Now, we had said that about Malcolm Gordon last weekend. Now, that fight didn't really make it far enough for him to wrestle himself into exhaustion, but Bektic does have that issue. And he was able to take down Damon Jackson and not have his way with him in a lot of the grappling, but he definitely was getting the better of the grappling exchanges on the mat throughout the majority of that fight.
He had a lot of control time. The sneaky part about control time, though, was the whole time that he was in control, Damon Jackson was just fishing for straight bass, and he just kept fishing for those submissions, and he kept working and working and working until it finally worked out for him.
It did, but there were a few points in that fight that were a little iffy for Damon Jackson. Bektic was able to take his back, which is never something that, you're overly thrilled about, but I do really like what Damon Jackson does. He pulls that ghillie, to quote Dustin Poirier. If you go for the takedown, he is not afraid to give up position in the attempt for a submission, because he realizes how good his ground game is and how slippery he must be on the mat. So this is a big problem with stats in MMA. If you look at Damon Jackson's takedown defense, I'm sure it's not very good. But the problem is he's a fighter who's not afraid of getting taken down. I think that's a very important distinction to make.
We talk about that a lot. It seems like every week we talk about a fighter that's like this. So for Damon Jackson, he had 3 fights in his first run in the UFC. He had 1 against Mirsad Bektic. His takedown accuracy, 20%. He goes for 1.22 takedowns per 15 minutes. His takedown defense, 35%. Now, the other thing that couples in with this is the fact that he wrestled at Missouri Valley College, and he wrestled at 165, 174. He was an All-American. Those are impressive things to have in your back pocket. And then for your takedown defense to match up like that and your takedown accuracy, it's just weird. But it's because he's such a good grappler and he can figure things out in his head. His jiu-jitsu is really where it needs to be. Also a Fortis MMA guy, so you know that he's going to be working on all of those. Plus, with Saif Saud and the good strikers that you have at Fortis, you're going to come out with a really well-rounded game. So I know that we had picked Mirsad Bektic on incredibly short notice. You can call us out for that in the comments if you'd like. But overall, incredibly impressed with Damon Jackson's performance in that one.
Oh, 100%. Now, this fight will be interesting because Ilia Topuria he is going to play the grappling game, if you will, with Damon Jackson. But Topuria does with MMA grappling what I do in UFC 4 online.
Spam overhand rights.
No, just stay in the person's face and try to outthink them constantly. And that's what Topuria does. When he's on the ground, he's always giving you something to think about. And John Danaher, it's always position and then submission. Position and then submission. And then you look at guys like Tony Ferguson, for instance, where it's just submission, 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 submission. I'm not afraid to give up position in the attempt of a submission. Ilia Topuria is more of that build where he will fish for your arm to try to get you to move a certain way, and then he'll try to work that into taking your back. He's a very intelligent grappler, and he is always making you think about something, and he's trying to make you make a mistake. He'll go for your arm when the real target is your neck, or he'll go for your neck when the real target's your arm. And I think that shows a certain intelligence in grappling that we don't see all that often in MMA, because I wouldn't really say Ilia Topuria is a jiu-jitsu fighter. I wouldn't really say he's a wrestler. I would say he mixes the two together very well to where there's not a big transition between his wrestling and his grappling. He mixes them together where the takedown is almost a pursuit of the submission. He's very good positionally about where he lands, and I do think that's important, especially in this fight. Damon Jackson jumping that guillotine, or really any submission, he's using them in defensive cases a lot of the time, and I do think Topuria, he'll go for those big takedowns, but he's an intelligent grappler. He can get them from the clinch. He can get them. He's got really good trips as well. And on the feet, I do lean with Topuria. I like his volume. I think the leg kicks of Topuria are going to be really important in this fight, because for a guy like Damon Jackson, we saw it in the Bektic fight. He was able to just outlast Mirsad. Where with Topuria, I don't think you're going to get that opportunity. Topuria won't get himself exhausted. He'll use all that energy to make you exhausted, not really the other way around like Bektic did. So as long as his cardio isn't, not to say bad, because of course Bektic has good cardio, just his output's so high, but if he's intelligent with his output, I do think Topuria can at least be sound enough defensively to put on enough of a grappling show on Damon Jackson.
So Matt, if we have a look at the odds on this one, Ilia Topuria open a -170 favorite. He's now at a -230. For Damon Jackson, open a +145. He's now at a +185. If we have a look over at Tapology for the picks by the voters, 486 total picks, 74% going with Topuria, 65% predicting a decision win for him. Now, in the research, this and that, I'd have to ask Mr. Damon Jackson, but from what I could find, BJJ purple belt, but we know he uses it as well as he can. And for Ilia Topuria, a black belt in jiu-jitsu. Overall, I really like this fight. You brought it up well, the fact that we have a lot of people that are good at just jiu-jitsu. They're good guys, gals with their jiu-jitsu, but they can't really work the takedown. You see that all the time. It's frustrating. You know how good of a jiu-jitsu player, how credentialed this fighter might be. They medaled at ADCCs. They even possibly won gold, but they just can't get that takedown in MMA. Ilia Topuria is one of those guys that can, and he will blast a double leg if he needs to. Now, I would not do that against Damon Jackson. That's probably a bad move. But overall, this should be a very, very good fight. And I'm siding with Ilia Topuria in this one. I like the fact a 23-year-old that has the wherewithal to really just push a steady pace. He's always looking to do something. He's always staying busy. In that fight that he had against Youssef Zalal, a guy who is a good striker, known as a good defensive wrestler. You watch that fight that Youssef Zalal had against Jordan Griffin, you knew that he could hang with a guy that's good at jiu-jitsu and MMA. Ilia Topuria really did a good job of winning that one over him. His average fight time for Topuria, 4 minutes and 23 seconds. And before that decision win over Youssef Zalal, because now this number is weighted, he only had one other fight that went into the second round. Out of all of his wins, 7 of them by submission, 1 by knockout, and the 1 over Zalal by decision. I like Topuria in this one, but hey, maybe Jackson plays spoiler again.
He very well could. It is hard to disagree with the Topuria pick. I like the wrestling. I like the jiu-jitsu. And even if he can't get the takedown, I do like him on the feet as well. So it's really hard to pick against the guy who you see winning all 3 phases of the fight.
Matt, I'm really looking forward to this fight. We're both going with Ilia Topuria to get the win. You're not going to want to miss the rest of the previews for this card, including our new main event between Jack Hermansson and Marvin Vettori. So stick around for that. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say.
Let's get into it.